I wanted to pop in and say this whole conversation resurfacing this week has gotten me thinking again. And I was thinking back to the different websites and things that I was finding when I started to try to get through Mike's information from his autopsy report against what the professionals were saying did not make sense to them. And they were saying, you know, we disagree with his autopsy. And the specialist that was the pathologist, he and I spoke on the phone several times, several meaning three. We spoke on the phone 3 times. And he was very detailed and very particular and caring toward Mike and did not want to miss dotting an I and crossing a T. And he and I had some words over the phone, and it was quite a scenario. It would take a long time to write it all out for you to understand, but I took note of the words that they were using and the things that they were saying, and so I would start putting them in search engines together. And okay, if this didn't make sense, but this was in his report, what would happen if I put these words together and look it up? And I ended up coming up with this group of French pulmonologists from a website that identify over 600 drugs that can cause the lungs to do and the heart to do what Mike's body did. And it just makes sense if you look at the medications and the onslaught and the amounts with no diagnosis, no proven need, no bacteria, no virus, no cancer cells, no anything that would have warranted these really strong medications. And plus, if you compound that with the fact that he received no nutrition in 11 days and very little, he had nothing by mouth, NPO is what it's called, and he couldn't swallow. As soon as the moxifloxacin paralyzed him, he had lost his burp and his swallow reflex, and he was so uncomfortable. So for those 10 of those 11 days, he couldn't swallow. And so he wasn't receiving any drink of any kind, and they were giving him IVs, but he was sweating profusely. And of course, we know our bodies, when they sweat, it's temperature regulation. It's also detoxifying, but more importantly, it's temperature regulation. Well, he wasn't showing a temperature, like a thermometer kind of temperature, but he kept saying, my body is burning up from the inside out. I'm vibrating from the inside out. That did show up in his autopsy, but no one believed it when he would say it. It didn't make any sense. And so when he would say that, people would say back to him, we believe that you have an imagined pain due to anxiety, and then they would give him more drugs. So anyway, I'm going to post below this comment that I'm making right now just four images of websites that I looked up right now, today, and one of them, I circled the date. It was dated 2013, and then it just blows my mind. And then one of them is updated information from this group of French pulmonologists that is April of 2019. And I just want you to see for yourselves that if the medical community were open to the fact that medicines can't be the first thing that you go to over intuition and listening to the voice of the patient, and especially if it's a man like Mike, who had not had any drugs in his system since age 9 when he had his tonsils taken out, and he had no record of medications or doctor visits or ill health. He was in the best shape of his life at that point. On November, I believe it was the 16th, I'd have to go back and look for sure, but I'm pretty sure it was the 16th, he played full court basketball. And he was uncomfortable because he was feeling the growth in there of what was lodged. But we were really foolish when I look back on it, and I see that the imaging results that they were giving to Mike, we weren't making the connection that they weren't from here up. That was where he was pointing. What that was dislodged from him, from the debris, from the mower and the land and all of that, that was lodged in a pocket kind of hidden behind and underneath his vocal cord area, and then up a little bit higher in his sinuses. It wasn't until way into the ICU part of his stay that the imaging was from here up. So they were looking at his chest, they were looking for pneumonia, they were looking for these things, and they weren't seeing it. And so even though they weren't finding what would have warranted all of this medication, the way of the system is try this, and then try this, and then try this. And it's like a way of almost prescribing. And the doctor told me that. And the one doctor, we nicknamed him Dr. Medicate, because all he did was give Mike these drugs that would then send him into these spiraling shock-like reactions. And it was horrible. And we begged him to stop. And he didn't stop. And then finally, on Mike's second day there, he, which was actually his third morning, but third. Hey, so I'm sitting on my floor now by the charger because I totally should have looked and noticed that I was at 3% on my phone when I started that video. And once I started talking, it still obviously fires me up. And whew, I don't mean to sound angry or vindictive in any way. I just know that there's a better way. So where I left off was with the doctor that we nicknamed Dr. Medicate, because that's all he knew to do. And I assumed that after I left there, I thought, well, that must have been a high-level student to have done all of that. And because it was under his watch that Mike ended up in rapid response mode in that anaphylaxis that put him into the ICU for the next 8 days. But when I looked up that doctor, he was not a student. He was actually a professor. And so it terrifies me that because he said to me specifically, he said when Mike was in that horrible state and the rapid response team was there with the stretcher waiting, and it was our anniversary, and all I could think of was, he's not going to die. Mike would not die on our anniversary. God wouldn't allow that. And he made it through that night. But anyway, the rapid response team was standing there waiting for the doctor to say, take him. And they were like, I had two friends there that were holding Mike up because Mike couldn't even, he was not doing well. It was like he was going to die right there. They're holding him up to keep him from tipping over. The rapid response team is standing there waiting for the doctor to say, okay, take him. And the doctor is looking at his clipboard. And he keeps saying to me, well, we gave him moxifloxacin, and we gave him, and then he names another drug, and we gave him, and he named another drug, and we gave him, and he named another drug. And then he looked at me and he said, did he have his Robitussin today? And I actually shook his shoulders and I said, this is not a Robitussin situation. And he ended up taking the clipboard and walking away briskly and saying, at this point, the rapid response team is putting Mike's body on the stretcher and or on the bed. And the doctor said to them, well, I guess this patient is better for the ICU anyway. And he walked out, and I never saw him again until a couple of years ago when we were at the tennis open, and that doctor was sitting 3 rows in front of us, and my dog's playing over there. Hey, Ellie, stop. And that was a crazy experience because there he was with his wife, and they were taking selfies and everything at the tennis open, and I was sitting there watching, going, oh, wow, how life has changed, and I'm feeling all the feelings right now. Anyway, what I want to say about that is he said, because before that point with Mike in that state, I asked him, why do you just keep giving him medications when you have no diagnosis? And he said to me, well, and he had a word for it, and I'd have to look through my notes and find it, but the word basically meant trial and error. It was kind of like they try a medication, and then they watch for the body's response. And then it gives them an inkling as to what he might have. And I shook my head and I said, that's not a good way to diagnose him because he's pointing to what he needs. And the other little thing, and I could just talk about this for, like, I have it recorded. It took me 3.5 hours to tell the whole story after it happened. So you guys got me all wound up this week, and I want to tell it. I just want to tell the whole thing because I think that there's pieces of this that would help just change some. Maybe this isn't the way that all places run. Hopefully and prayerfully not. But I do know, based on what I have heard and your stories over the last 3 years plus, that it is very common. And whenever I sought legal counsel, I wasn't really seeking legal action. It wasn't about the money for me. The reason why I sought legal counsel was because they had said to me that the only way that I could ask questions and get them to answer them was if I took them to court. So I was like, well, I guess I'll have to try that. That didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work was because the lawyers would come back to me and say, Amy, this is too common. And that's shocking to me. I'm like, no, this can't be too common. There needs to be someone saying, this just isn't right. It's not right. The human body is amazing. And the body, like Mike was saying to them during those days, he was saying, I've got nothing. I'm trying to help you help me, and I've got nothing. Where's the oxygen? Where's the nutrition? Where's the hydration? Just the basics. My body needs the basics. And it just wasn't happening. And it got to the point where he just couldn't, his will wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough, and his body gave out. So I don't want that to happen to you. And I don't want that to happen to your loved ones. So I just, on the part one of this, before my phone went dead, I put 4 pictures, and it was just of two of the drugs that I knew off the top of my head that I just put into the search engine of that. And the reason why it came up with that particular drug-induced word for the heading was because I found it again by typing in the words from Mike's autopsy with the words from his death certificate that the medical leaders there said did not make sense to them. And it does make sense if you believe that too much medication is a problem. Then it makes sense. And so I hope and pray that our medical community can start. The other thing, one of the doctors, I'll end with this because I'll talk forever if I just sit here talking. But the one doctor who was really, truly on our side, I mean, it's not like all of them were. They weren't like waking up every day for 11 days going, how can we see Mike Schroyer die? That was not their intention. Their intention was to help and to find out what was wrong. And they threw all of the major doctors there into this scenario. Like, there became too many hens in the hen house, honestly. And but it was like the top oncologist was in our room. And I remember one of the nurses like being very fangirl. And when he walked out, she said, oh, do you know who that was? And I said, no. Can you help my husband? And she was like, oh, he's won so many awards. And while that is awesome, that oncologist was shaking his head. And he said to Mike, he said, you don't have cancer. I don't know why they want to do this procedure on you because there's no way you have cancer. And that was the top oncologist. And, you know, by the end of it all, the people who disagreed with each other, they still weren't on the same page in those meetings, even after having Mike's body as evidence and the autopsy and all of that. And I really believe if they would have looked at medication toxicity, they could have all gotten on the same page, but they just couldn't look behind that curtain. And the one doctor that I grew to love, she had gone on her days off. And then when she came back, Mike was gone. And she had put him on, because when the nurse pulled that stuff out, then she said, yeah, we need to stop medication. And she put him on a detox plan that was supposed to be until she got back. And the doctor at night who disagreed with her kept the medications going. And that particular doctor said to me, Amy, my team was afraid of you. And I said, I'm sorry. I did not mean to be like that. If I scared anyone or whatever, I was just fighting for my husband. And she said, I know. And she said, but do you want to know why they were afraid of you? And I said, yeah, I do. And she said, you asked hard questions and you asked smart questions. You knew things about diet and nutrition that we're not trained on. And when doctors are asked questions that they don't know the answer to, it's terrifying to a doctor. So anyway, there's more than just medication is what I have to say. And I think our world is going in that direction. The European Medical Association is getting there way faster than the American Medical Association. And I mean, I have in my head things that I would love to say to our governmental leaders. You know, I would love to sit down and talk to the Attorney General. I have these crazy ideas. I'm the crazy person sitting on my floor by my charger, petting my dog. But my mind never stops on this stuff. And I know that there's a better that we can find. And we need it. So anyway, I posted those couple of images. And that's the kind of stuff that when I actually get Mike's medical records out and I pour through and make a list of the actual drugs, I will look on websites like that one with the French pulmonology team. And you know, people can see for themselves that there's contraindications, and we need to learn way more. Like people who have been, it's called floxed. I'm sure you've seen it a lot in my timeline if you've watched any. But fluoroquinolone drugs are so dangerous, and that's the moxifloxacin. I watched it go. The IV was this big, and it was like a dark yellow, and it was going into his body. And while it was going into his body, it was like something from the Gremlins movie, if you remember that. It kind of shows my age, but his entire body, every little teeny tiny muscle began to vibrate. Like it looked like in the Gremlins where they're going to pop out because the gremlin had water on them. And it was terrifying. And I ran and got the charge nurse, and I made her come in and look at what his body was doing. I almost videoed it with my phone, but I was freaking out and holding his hand because he was in so much pain. And I said to her, stop this. Like, what is happening to him? And she sat me down and she said, it gets worse before it gets better. You need to stop overreacting. And I couldn't believe it. And I sat there and I wept because now the IV is like down to here. It's all in its body. There's nothing I can do to take it out. And he was never the same. That was in that moment, that was when he lost his swallow reflex, his burp reflex. He stumbled, he couldn't stand. That was the night before, the next day when he went into the rapid response mode. So I know that exact moment. I know it was that drug that took him to this whole new level. And then when he went into the ICU, they were looking at a man who didn't even show what he looked like. Let's see, it was November 16th. He's playing full court basketball. And now it's November, let's see if it was on our anniversary. November 23rd was when he was wheeled to ICU. I mean, it doesn't take a brain scientist to figure out that something went very, very wrong, and the only changes were medicative care. It was the medication part of it that threw him into that whole new place. And, he went in because he couldn't breathe, and a nurse got out those two areas he was pointing to finally, and his entire body filled with oxygen, all the way down to the tips of his toes. His toes turned like a purplish color. And we were so relieved at that point, but we knew it was going to be a long healing because of what else we were dealing with now at that point. But we were up for the challenge. Like, it would have been awesome to see him heal. Then I actually got a beautiful private message, and I'll post a picture of it under here. Someone messaged me last night and said, I didn't realize, this is a paraphrase, you can read the real words underneath, but he said, he watched that video about Mike for the first time, and he said that he couldn't believe that I was willing to help other people, and that it must be really painful. And it is painful, but I don't want you to go through it, and I don't want, that guy and his wife to go through it, and it can be stopped. Like, there are things that can happen and change for the better, and so I think it makes me feel better to help other people, and I feel like I finally can at this point because I'm better. It's still sad. These tears aren't, I don't know, it's all mixed up, but these tears are that I don't want people to feel like they can't learn from Mike's story, because if it's not for some reason, then what in the heck is it for, right? I mean, it has to be for something. So I'm hoping that something is helping thousands of people, because it's literally thousands and millions of people that are harmed by these medications, and it's got to stop. It's just got to stop. So I'm going to stop babbling now, because obviously that's all I'm doing. But I love you, and I'll post that comment under here so you can read it. It was just beautiful. It made my day. And if that's what's coming and the ability to help others, then it's going to feel nice to have such purpose. So you guys have a great night. I'm going to go work out because I'm finally taking care of Amy, and I'm finally working out, and it feels really good, and my kids are loving the healthy food, and it's a new day. Love you. Bye.